my life. You know, Charles Schulz developed a comic strip called Peanuts. If you live anywhere in the world, you really have some idea of. I've seen surveys where one of the most recognizable figures in the entire planet, no matter where you go, is people like Charlie Brown and Snoopy. It's really amazing how far his ideas went and how they've touched so many people. Peanuts is an interesting way of looking at the world in terms of the philosophies that Charles Schulz brought out. It was kind of his way of reflecting what the human condition is and what it is to be a human being. And he really ran the full gamut of different ideas in psychology and spirituality. And one of the central figures in Peanuts is, of course, Charlie Brown. And we have this kind of view of Charlie Brown as this person who is filled with a lot of anxiety and angst and depression and sometimes anger. And he has a very good friend named Linus. And Linus is sort of the archetype of the minister in a way. He's sort of like the personal spiritual counselor of Charlie Brown. And there's times in the comic strips when Charlie Brown would be really down on himself. And I'm going to talk about one of the narratives that kind of adds to his angst and his depression in just a moment. But whenever he would go through these things, like sometimes he would wonder, you know, what is the true meaning of Christmas, and what is the true meaning of life, and what is the true meaning of love, and these kinds of things. And Linus would come forward and share philosophical ideas with him and even quote scripture. It's interesting because Linus sort of represents the religious figure because he has his security blanket, which is, we could think of that as basically the theology that he grounds his own experiences and his own foundation in. And so he's got the trappings of it. You know, that could be his Bible, that can be his prayer beads, that can be his altar, that could be his incense. But in fact, there's some times when Linus is so upset when he doesn't have his blanket because it's in the washer and in the dryer. There were strips where he would sit in front of the dryer endlessly waiting for it to come out so he could get his hands on it once again, because that's where he found his real meaning. And so the central piece, one of the narratives of Peanuts I want to bring forward today and to introduce another character, is the idea that Charlie Brown was the pitcher of a baseball team that was made up of all the Peanuts characters. And this team was notoriously the team that never won a game ever. And Charlie Brown, as a pitcher, had the worst win-loss record in history. And so this would add to his angst, and there were strips about the games and strips about how hard the other teams were hitting his pitches. And you would see the ball fly up through the middle, and all of his cap and his glove and his shoes and his shirt would all come off because the ball was hit by him so hard. And in baseball, you know, you kind of measure a pitcher by how hard the other team hits. And the whole point is that the harder the other team hits, the worse the pitcher is. So Charlie Brown would leave these games and he'd be walking home and he would be regurgitating the terrible thoughts that he had about himself, his own self-image, his own self-belief system. He'd call himself a blockhead. He'd call himself a loser. And these were terms that fans of Peanuts got to become very aware of. But there was another member of the team, and he played shortstop, and his name was Snoopy. And what we know about Snoopy is this dog who took on all kinds of manifestations in the strip. I looked online, and Snoopy had been dozens, if not hundreds, of other kinds of alter egos. And he played a shortstop. He was a hockey player. He was a world famous author. He was a grocery store clerk. He was a penguin. He was a dragon. He was all these different things that Snoopy would go into this alter ego and become. And he was the shortstop of the team, this team that lost every single game. And in terms of one of the alter egos, you know, while we see Charlie Brown walking around calling himself a blockhead and a loser, I want to zero in on one alter ego of Snoopy, which was to be the World War I flying ace who would go into the sky and battle the Red Baron. And so I want you to imagine for a moment, let me share a narrative with you that, let's say that the Peanuts crowd, they play one of their games on a Saturday afternoon and they've lost like they usually do, and Charlie Brown was a terrible pitcher and he got another loss to add to his record. And so all the kids go home and Charlie Brown is walking home forlorn with his shoulders bent and his head down, and he's calling himself a blockhead and he's calling himself a loser. Meanwhile, Snoopy, who's the shortstop, who played in the same game and played on the same team, he runs home really quick. He takes his cap off. He takes his glove off. He puts on his flight helmet with his goggles, and he gets on top of his doghouse, and now it becomes a Sopwith Camel, which is this amazing flying machine of World War I. And he goes down the runway, and he goes into the stars. He goes into the heavens to battle a war hero. And so he's up there having all kinds of adventures and exploits. And we see that Snoopy he's grounded. His feet and his baseball glove have the dirt and the dust of the game. He is grounded in the game. He's grounded in the experience, but he's able somehow to transcend that, to go into the heavens. There's a Serbian proverb that says, our foundation or our core is a reflection that we are made of the earth, and our nobility is a reflection that we are also made of the stars. So if you think about that for a moment, what a beautiful concept. The Snoopy plays shortstop. Snoopy has the experience, the community experience with his friends, his loved ones on this team. And then this team has these challenges. But he is able somehow to transcend himself and remember that he is also made of the stars, which is something that Charlie Brown struggles with. And he goes to Linus to try and figure this out. But then there's this figure named Snoopy. And today I refer to him as Snoopy Lama, because we think of those incredible masters of this world who have come down through us through the ages, and who some of them are still with us today. And I think every generation has its masters who simply are there walking the streets with us, walking the paths with us, in the dust, in the earth, but they also know that we are connected to the stars. And I think the question that we all have before us, kind of in a spiritual way, is how do we get back to the stars? I have this bowl. Now make sure you see it there. This is a singing bowl. It's a Tibetan. It's called the Tibetan singing bowl. And years ago, not long before I left Paradise, I purchased this, and I had it for a little while in the center up there. But then when I went to work in drug rehabilitation at Skyway House, I took it with me. And it was important for me to take with me because whenever I do a group, and I used to do classes all the time at the Paradise Center, and now in my job as a counselor, I hold groups. And I wanted something to be able to ground that group. In other words, we come together. We've all lived our lives. We've dealt with our children. We've dealt with our jobs. We've grocery shopped. We've driven around town. We've paid our taxes. We've paid PG&E, and we come together, and we're coming into a class, and that place where we can sort of set things aside and open ourselves up to different ideas. And so what I would do is I like to set the bowl there, and then as the class begins, maybe before or after a prayer, just simply to ring the bowl. And to me, it was kind of almost like a saging practice or a settling practice. That beautiful sound that kind of brings us into a place. Well, at Skyway House, where I work, I've gotten kind of a reputation for my bowl, and for the fact that, the clients always know when I'm going to do a group, because in the living room, I set the bowl on this big square table that's in there. And so they know I'm going to be doing groups that day. And sometimes the bowl is a subject of conversation, because they talk about the fact that, I ring the bowl like this, but they know that the bowl can be, we call it a singing bowl, because when you go around the rim, then you have this beautiful note rise up out of it. And these notes can get huge in context. They can take over a room. And the clients sometimes like to mess around with it, because I'm not very good at that. I'm not very good at making it sing that way. So I will do the best I can to tutor them in how to do it, but I'm not very good. But some of the clients sometimes are amazing, and they can have the thing sing. So this one day, And this is going back almost a year ago. I had a client who I'd been working with on my caseload, and he'd been there for several weeks, someone in his mid to late 20s. And he had experienced a lot of things in his life that were challenging. And he was at Skyway House in order to overcome these challenges, not just the addictive challenges, but a lot of other challenges. And we've been doing some work. I had him doing some modules, which are some printed materials that maybe they deal with anger, maybe they deal with family systems, maybe they deal with addiction, whatever. And so that the idea is he goes and does the work, and then together we get together at some point during the week and we process that work and we talk about it, and we talk about the meaning it had for him and all those sorts of things. So this one day, I met with this one client, and again about a year ago, and we sat down at a round table next to my desk, and he came in and he sat down, and I could see by his body language and kind of his slumped shoulders, that he was not in a really good space, and he was very quiet. And I could see in his face, I could see sadness and angst and worry and maybe anger. I mean, his whole the areas of his eyes just had this heaviness to them. And so I began to talk about, what do you think of the material, and what's it mean to you? And I was just getting these very superficial responses, one or two words, and his body language, his shoulders slumped even more, and his head dropped down more, and the angst in his face increased. And I realized that I really wasn't getting anywhere. And so I took a moment and I said, "Can you tell me what's going on? You don't seem very connected today." And he says, I don't know. I don't know what's going on with me." So we sat there, and then he said to me, he said, "The other day you left your bowl, on the table after group, and it was there all night." And I said, "Yeah, there was this one day where I did that." And he said, he said, "I went in the front room and I took the mallet and I went around and around." He said, "Wow," he said, "it was amazing." He said, "They could hear that bowl through the entire house, and people came out and then they started messing around with it." And I found myself getting kind of irritated and agitated a little bit that I'm trying to do this work on, let's talk about your issues and stuff, and he wanted to talk about the bowl. But fortunately for me, I didn't show my angst over this. I didn't show my disapproval of this or my lack of patience with it, and I certainly didn't say anything. And so I'm just listening to him, and he said, in the bowl, I had this bowl sitting on a bookcase kind of behind my desk, and he looked over and saw it, and he said, can you bring the bowl over here? And I said, "Yeah, okay, I guess I can bring the bowl." Yeah, I didn't say it that way. I was thinking that, but I said, "Yeah, sure." But I was thinking, "Oh my God, come on, we got to do some work here." So I brought it over, and he looked at it, and he was sort of asking me about the color of it and about, the symbols around it. And I was telling him that the person I bought it from had told me that there was a Sanskrit prayer printed in this, and he asked me what it was made of, and I said I was told that it was made of all kinds of different metals, and that and he said, "Well, what's the point of having the prayer in there?" And I said, "Well, they say that if you get the vibration going, then the prayer moves into the universe." "What kind of a prayer is it?" He said, "Well, I said, "I don't really know. I think it's a prayer grounded in peace and abundance of peace, abundance of joy, those kinds of things." So he puts it on his hand, and he takes the mallet, and pretty soon he begins to try and make it sing. And so I sat there, and again, I was getting a little bit impatient, but I sat there and let him do his thing. And pretty soon he actually the note began to rise out of it. And it took him a while, but he stayed with it. And the note began to rise out of it, and it got louder and louder, and we were sitting around this round table. And I was looking at him, and I looked at his face, and the angst, the worry, the anger, the sadness began to melt and dissipate. And I just simply sat there and watched him, and this note came up. And when he really got it going good, he looked at me and the smile broke out like, hey, look, I did it. I got this thing going. I said, man, that's amazing. I said, as you know, I struggle with that. So I have a lot of props for you, man, to be able to do that, And so anyway, then he let it dissipate and he put it back on the little round cushion that it goes on. And he put the mallet down. And so I became aware at that time that I needed to set my preconceived ideas and my professionalism aside for a moment. And I needed to let this happen. And so we sat in a few moments of silence, and I decided I'm just going to be quiet. I'm just going to be quiet. And so we sat, and then he leaned forward and he picked up his paper and he began to tell me about what it was like to process this material and what it brought out in him. And we had this incredible conversation about the realizations in his life and about some things that were going on and some things he was really struggling with. Losses as a young person up through teenage years in his early 20s, and then losses he had manifested in his own addictions. And it was really an amazing thing. It was an amazing session. And it was such a great learning experience for me. The idea of opening up, the idea of taking the time to reach for the stars. And I think about this bowl as an iconic figure, the metals in it that come from the earth. And the Serbians say, our foundation, our core is a reflection that we are made in the earth. And I thought about the prayers that are housed in Sanskrit around the edges of this. And they said, and our nobility is a reflection that we are also made of the stars. Snoopy is completely comfortable in both places. Charlie Brown has so much angst about one of those places that he has a hard time even recognizing that the other place exists. But Snoopy knows that he is of both worlds. Snoopy knows through all his alter egos that each and every one of those live within him at some level. And he brings them out as an experience of the fact that he is also created of the stars. And I discovered in sitting with that young man that day that there is a place for us to simply move beyond what we think we are supposed to inhabit and dare to open up to something larger, and a combination of both places. I asked Macy to cue up for me the Kathy Zabata song, because this is a song that became very important to me as a minister when I was a full-time minister of a center, where that was my full-time job. And I would come in on Sunday mornings, and the way that I looked at myself was that my entire week built up to Sunday. And I kind of came around. I think of the week as a circle, and I came around and I ended up on Sunday. And sometimes the week that preceded Sunday, getting ready for Sunday, and but there would be board meetings, and there would be classes, and there would be counseling sessions, and there would be budgetary meetings, and there would be conversations with different people, and there would be events that come up, and some of those were great, and some of them were challenging, and some of them I walked away feeling like I felt like I really showed up for it. And other times I kind of wondered how well I did, and maybe I didn't do so well. And maybe that week I did a memorial service, and maybe that week maybe I had an intense conversation with a board member or a member or something like that. And so sometimes I would come around into Sunday, and I would kind of have the week hanging with me. And the center that I was minister of, we had this great sound system, And I didn't know much about it. I had a couple of sound people. I had one sound person in particular that was really amazing, and our musician who was really amazing. He knew a little bit about it, but I knew enough to turn it on, and out of a database, I could get a recording to play on the sound system. So I would go out into the sanctuary. I would go out and I would turn something on, and I was the only one there, and I was surrounded by whatever it was. And 9 times out of 10, it was Kathy Zavada's "Let Go and Let God." Because when I would come to the center every week as the minister, as the one who was going to be speaking and all that sort of thing, I would always ask myself, what am I here for? You know, not as a minister, but what is it that I need from this coming together once a week and coming to this sacred altar of experience and consciousness? The way that Snoopy goes into the heavens on an adventure, and the way that the young man decided to reach for the stars with a singing bowl. Something to break the heaviness, the denseness of our experiential journey, the dust of the baseball game. And I would sit, and sometimes I would repeat the song over and over again, because I would always show up really super early, and I'd be there almost an hour completely alone before anyone came, and I would just play this song, and I'd let it wash over me. I'd let it remind me to let go and let God. And no matter what I was going through, God was right here. But I was still a person of the earth. I was still here. I had to get back to the business of what it was to live. The way that this client and I, after he did the singing bowl, we came back to the business. Let's talk about life. But we could come there from a realization that we are connected to something bigger, to something ethereal, to flight, to the stars, to the universe, and not to forget that. And Kathy Zavada would help me get there by saying, you know, Andy, let go, breathe, feel it, get in touch with it. You are more than anything that happened in this week. Like the client, you are more than your moods right now. Charlie Brown, you are more than the score of this game. It's an important part of your life, but you are more than that. I've been so touched by what I've read in my own spiritual readings and stuff. When you look at the Native American, you know, their traditions, and sometimes they refer to things as feather wisdoms, dances and ceremonies. Feather meaning flight, meaning, and in a lot of indigenous cultures and First Nations cultures, and in our most ancient of spiritual traditions, the bird was such an amazing symbol, an archetype, you know, something that would land on the trees and walk on the ground, but then could take flight and could migrate and have that different perspective and move into the stars and move into the heavens. And you sometimes see Native Americans in, depending upon what tribe it is, in this regalia where they take on the look and the mannerisms of the bird, and they dance and they dance, and the dance represents the flight. The dance represents the circles that are being soared in the air. But as they dance, they kick up the dust, and there's this feeling that, yeah, we are of the earth. We are here. We are changing diapers. We are harvesting food. We are changing the oil in our cars. We are shopping. We are dealing with our neighbors. We're dealing with politics, and we're dealing with COVID, and we're dealing with everything, and that's the dust. But we remember that we are part of something that's larger. That's what Snoopy represented in the Peanuts comic strip. He wasn't a minister like Linus. He was a Lama. He was a master. He was someone who simply stepped into the stars. You know, right now in the center, a lot of you are reading a book, and one of the co-authors is the Dalai Lama. And I'm so amazed at this guy because, you know, of anyone, he's traveled the world, and what he's been through himself in his own life. And most of us know the life he's led, and most of us know the challenges. And here is someone who has experienced the dust, experienced the angst, experienced life. And yet he's someone who brings laughter to us, who honors us, who walks around almost just a little bit off the ground, without pretension, without being better than us. He is one of us, but yet he is a way shower to what it is to move through it with grace and dignity and peace and compassion. Ernest Holmes says in his work, we are ever unfolding from limitless potential. So that's Snoopy. Snoopy is limitless potential. He had dozens, if not hundreds, of alter egos. It is the singing bowl. We look at this metal piece here. We look at what's there, and if you're talented enough to move the mallet around, it sings. It breaks through. It brings a note forward that touches our soul. It comes from the earth. It represents something ethereal. You know, this is when Holmes says we are ever unfolding from limitless potential. I think of him saying, hey guys, we are star children. For there is no limit to the law. As our understanding of this truth unfolds, our attainments will increase. And what are our attainments? Our attainments are here in this life, in the earth in which we live. I think the greatest thing that we can aspire to be, and I speak to myself as well, is Snoopy. Are these great masters that we see who walk among us. They are not the exceptions, they are the examples. Snoopy is not the exception, Snoopy is the example. A beautiful combination of the earth and the star. I want to thank you for being here today. I want to say namaste, and so that concludes that. And so now, what I would like to do is I would like to have us turn towards